Dan Applequist for Samsung Internet.
I'm Lola, also for Samsung Internet.
And we're here to talk to you about web privacy today.
So Dan, privacy is huge in the news at the moment. Let us know a little bit about why we should care about privacy on the web specifically.
Right. And it is, digital privacy has been a huge topic for years now. One of the things that I always think about when I think about digital privacy is the fact that as more of our life is lived online, everything that we do, from banking to to-do lists, to working with colleagues, to chatting with friends, video calling, decisions that have to do with our healthcare, decisions that have to do with our with being born, with dying, all kinds of aspects. Every aspect of our lives these days is mediated online in some way. There's some kind of web aspect to it, right? And privacy is about making sure that you're able to keep the things private that you want to keep private, and that you don't unexpectedly share information that you're not expecting to share with parties that you're not expecting to share it with.
Right.
It's about control. It's about control of information flows, and that's vital. It's not just important; it's vital in the modern age. And a lot of people get confused because they think about, well, privacy, if I'm not doing anything wrong, then surely why do I need privacy? Or why do I need privacy if I'm just accessing news articles? Well, what if that news article is about a topic that the government doesn't like you to know about? Or and you live in a country where the government is a lot more difficult with people, then you could very well be in that kind of situation where you want that browsing activity, even if it's to Wikipedia pages or static pages. You want to know that that's private, and you want to know that that your private thoughts are your own.
Your own thoughts,
Your own thoughts, that's right. So how does that impact the web? Well, one of the things that I like to, or that I understand about the web and that I like about the web, is that it's inherently a more private platform than other digital platforms. And that's because you have the browser. So just to clarify, when we're talking about the web, and when, from a Samsung Internet perspective, Samsung Internet is a browser, and we're talking about digital services that are accessed through the browser.
So that wouldn't include any mobile apps? That wouldn't include any smart devices?
If you're talking about mobile apps that are just downloaded from the store, then no. We're not talking, so for instance, if you're talking about like using the Facebook app, when you use the Facebook app, you're downloading code that Facebook has written, and that's running directly on your device. When you're using Facebook through the browser, when you go to your mobile browser and type in Facebook, then you're executing that code. That code is executing inside the browser, and the browser is playing a role of keeping you safe. So, and allowing you to audit what Facebook has access to, what Facebook does not have access to.
So what's a good example of access in that context then?
Something like your location, for instance. So if you give Facebook access to your location, in the browser, or if you're being asked for your location, then the browser will prompt you. This application wants to know your location, or this application wants to open up your microphone or your camera. And those controls are a lot stronger in the browser. There are also OS level controls for those things, but those controls are a lot stronger in the browser where you can audit them. Also things like push notifications, things like tracking, which is something that I know we're going to talk about. Right? So that's one of the reasons why people who are working on the web often talk about privacy in the web in the same breath, because the web itself is a more privacy-focused platform. Also, because the web is built on the web is built on standards. Because the web is built on standards, there's a rigorous process for developing those standards in places like the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, where we're active. And every new technology that is proposed to be added to the web goes through a review process. Part of that review process is, for example, a privacy review, answering questions about, does your new technology expose private information? Does it appropriately prompt the user? Are there privacy controls in place? And those questions, I participate in that through my work in the tag, and we're constantly asking technology proposers and standards developers, have you taken these privacy issues into account? And that, over time, also increases the privacy awareness of the whole platform. And it is a way that we're working to ensure that the web continues to be that privacy plus platform. Yeah.
And I think even, outside of the technical architecture group that you just mentioned, there are other specific groups within the W3C that cater to privacy, such as the privacy community group, which is something that I'm involved in and I'm a part of, where new proposals come to us that are usually specifically about privacy. So, for example, a proposal that is currently being discussed is the first party sets proposal, which is looking at how we can redefine what a first party is. For those who are unfamiliar with the term first party, third party, there are blog posts on the Samsung Internet blog where I speak in a lot more detail explaining these things, but it really has to do with ownership. It has to do with what domain owns what database, what set of cookies, what content. Really, that's what we talk about when we say first party versus third party. And so a lot of the conversation that is very spirited and it can be quite controversial, but I think it's also important. And we have browser vendors such as Google, such as Firefox, such as Samsung Internet being involved in these discussions, because ultimately everybody wants, everybody's invested in making things private and safer for end users, for people who use the browser, as we've spoken about.
And I think that privacy community group that you mentioned has a really strong participation from civil society groups, privacy advocates.
Advocates, activists, educators, all sorts of people are involved in these conversations. So it doesn't even have to be people who are technical or who feel like they're, invested for work, right? It's also people who are advocating for regular everyday people. And because it's a community group, anybody can get involved. So your mum could get involved, your nephew could get involved, anybody can get involved if they want to know more about the kind of work that's being developed for the web and how browser vendors and people in general are thinking about privacy on the web. So definitely get involved if this is something you're interested in. So yeah.
Well, speaking about regular people, so, I've talked a little bit about the philosophy behind the web and web and privacy. I think you wanted to talk a little bit about how the rubber meets the road, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. I think when we speak about privacy, we have a habit of speaking at a very high level, but how does this affect everyday people who use the browser, who are just shopping and who are just, attending to their everyday needs, working, going to school, whatever. And especially during, the pandemic, as you mentioned, everything has moved to the web now. So you're going to school online, you're going to work online, everything's happening online. And you made a really good point about a lot of people are just like, well, I'm not doing anything bad. I'm just going on Wikipedia, or I'm just reading a news article, I'm just doing my everyday thing, so why should I care? Well, what we're seeing is a lot of the tracking that's being done online, and I'm speaking specifically about tracking because that is a lot of the private efforts that are happening now is to prevent tracking. Some people may have heard that third-party cookies are, getting done away with, and that's because of the tracking implications that third-party cookies brought along. Tracking online on the web specifically is mainly done for advertising purposes. So because advertisers want to sell you stuff all the time,
right.
They want to know what you've Googled, what you searched for on your Amazon wish list, or what you've even just typed into your browser. They want to know what your search history is so they can predict the kind of things that you want, and they can advertise those things to you, and you're more likely to buy them.
Right. Like if you've ever, like I have been in the market for like a new dishwasher,
exactly.
and you do a bit of searching about new, dishwashers online, then suddenly
everything is about
mysteriously you find these white goods following you around the web.
Right.
It's extremely disconcerting,
right.
And that's one of the most visible aspects of that.
Exactly, and that seems harmless, but when we start to kind of dismiss these things, what you tend to see happening is, so these kind of adverts are called behavioral adverts. They work on what your browsing history is and use that to determine what to advertise to you. However, this is kind of problematic because we've seen, apart from the fact that many people don't consent to this or don't know they can consent or remove their consent for this stuff, we've seen these behavioral ads used in very nefarious ways. For example, Cambridge Analytica used the exact same technology to convince people which way to vote in certain elections that has happened. That's not good. We don't want that kind of thing. And, they've done even more nefarious things as well, where we've seen how Facebook has been involved in certain other things in terms of government regimes and etc.
Yeah.
We don't want
influencing
that kind of
people's behavior through
exactly.
using the same technologies, same tracking technologies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we don't want that. And there are alternative ways to do advertising online. We can do contextual ads, which is to say that if you go on a supermarket website, you can expect items in a supermarket to be advertised to you.
Yeah.
Right? That doesn't use your browsing history to determine that. That just says, okay, this person's on a supermarket website, we can advertise supermarket items to them.
Right.
And also just in consent-informed ways as well, where you specifically ask the user, what do you want to see? Because at the end of the day, even now where we're seeing advancements made in tracking in terms of the EU recently is released some legislation that says you can't use certain characteristics to advertise to people, such as race and politics. But these kind of like groups of things are also a little bit controversial because, for example, somebody who has had difficulty with pregnancy may not want to see, Pampers advertised to them.
Right, and they're going to be exactly the ones that are targeted with the contextual with the tracked ads.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, if you're in a situation where you can say like, "Hey, I don't mind other ads, but I don't want to see pregnancy ads, or I don't want to see baby ads or anything like that," that puts the power into the user's hands in terms of the kind of information they want to receive, right? And so these are the kind of conversations we are having in general within the W3 scene, within these privacy groups. Recently, Google released the Topics API, which I recently wrote about on the blogs. And these are the conversations that are happening. We're trying to understand how we can give more power, essentially, to the end user, to the people who browse the internet without jeopardizing their privacy.
And this is also something that is kind of a product differentiator for Samsung Internet.
Yes.
So one of the things that we have built in, own-built, homegrown, so to speak, tracking blocking technology called Smart Anti-Tracking.
Yeah.
We have HTTPS upgrades, so that automatically upgrades your connection from unsecure HTTP to HTTPS. Right now that's in labs. You have to turn it on under the labs tab,
Yeah.
but we will be turning that on by default later on in the year, so that's exciting. And we actually have a whole privacy wizard that you can go to at privacy.samsunginter.net.
Yeah.
I'll include the link as well in the description.
Yeah.
And that gives you a kind of step-by-step guide about how to secure, how to lock down your Samsung Internet installation.
Yeah.
So all the technologies are there to help you. And one of them, the smart anti-tracking, is based on a notion that tracking, people do not want to be tracked.
Exactly, exactly. And I think that's actually quite important to mention, because outside, when you think of it in general, if somebody was just following you on the street, even if you weren't doing anything wrong, and writing down everything you did and everything you looked at, you would think that was weird. Like, you wouldn't be okay with that, even if you were just walking on the street. Like, that would be a cause for concern. And so we don't want that kind of behavior, you know, on the web as well. We want to limit that as much as possible on the web too.
So what kinds of stuff, besides, you talked about first-party sets, but what kinds of other technologies are being worked on in the standards space right now that we should be looking at?
I did speak a little bit about first-party sets. As I also mentioned, the Topics API is something new that's being worked on, and this is actually happening in the private advertising community group. So this is separate from the privacy community group. And private advertising is all, as the name entails, about private advertising specifically. And what the Topics API is about is, instead of using third-party cookies to track, there will be a master list of topics, right? And these topics will be human curated, and based on your browsing history, you can be assigned up to five topics. And that's a random generation of topics. So like,
breakfast cereals.
A little bit more high level. Food.
Okay.
Or, you know, like more high level things. And so at the moment, I believe it's the list is only like 350 topics long. So it's, you know, quite condensed. And what happens is you'll be put into a cohort with thousands of other people, and randomly assigned topics within your cohort, and you only have topics that last, you're only in that cohort for a week, and then after a week, things renew, things are changed. And the idea is that it's anonymized. There are issues around that though, because we know that it's easy to de-anonymize people. It's not as difficult as assumed to de-anonymize. However, the kind of idea is that, you know, with it being thousands and thousands and thousands of people, it's harder to de-anonymize.
Yeah, and if the topics are general enough. But again, it's controversial, but it is at least something that's trying to.
Right. I think that's kind of the idea, right? Like, we're going from something which is pretty terrible, and we need to it's going to take incremental changes before we get to something that is like the ideal, because you're also trying to manage the expectations of many different stakeholders here: advertisers, end users, and then advocates who really care about privacy. And so I think is going to be, when it, you know, because it's still fairly new, so when people have had time to sit on it and think about it and interrogate it, I still think it's going to be fairly controversial, because again, it's still relying on this tracking. It's still relying on behavioral
way
advertising.
Of tracking.
It's a different way, and it's supposed to be a better way because of the anonymization. Users will be able to opt out, and so will websites. They'll also be able to opt out. But again, it's not off by default. It's on by default. So you have to know about it to opt out about it. And the average user is not going to know about this.
Right. I should say also on by default in Chrome.
In Chrome, specifically.
Specifically, right. And again, this is one, you know, we don't have a position on it in Samsung Internet yet officially, because it's not been released. It's still under development.
And I think that's a good thing, because as it's still in development, we can lay our advice in there. We can ask questions. We can interrogate it. And I think that's the great thing about standards in general, and especially when it's happening within a community group, we can interrogate this and we can fortify it. And as you said, within the technical architecture group process, this is going to have to come to the technical architecture group at some point. And the technical architecture group is going to have to be like, okay, does it meet these privacy requirements? How are we protecting
also the privacy interest. There are multiple privacy review processes within W3C.
Exactly. Exactly. And so that's another thing that's being discussed. I mean, there's just so many going on. You've got Storage Access API, which is a little bit more technical and a little bit more in depth. So there's a lot going on.
It looks like that will be launching in Samsung Internet. So that's really good news.
And so there'll be more written on the blogs about this as more developments happen. But it is interesting times right now. It really is.
So we should leave people with some links because this is the web. Right? Okay.
Yeah, so you can follow us on Twitter at Samsung Internet.
Or you can visit our page on developer.samsung.com/internet. And that has links to our Medium blog, all the blog posts that we do, which are also mirrored on developer.samsung.com blog. Where else can people? You can follow me on @Torgo.
And you can follow me at Lola on Twitter as well.
Okay, and thanks a lot for listening.
Thanks for watching.